The bitter wind whipped across the open prairie like a vengeful spirit, driving needles of ice into Tabitha Mason's face as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other desperately trying to hold her tattered shawl against the merciless December blizzard of 1871. She had been walking for hours since the stagecoach driver had forced her out at gunpoint, claiming her presence was bad luck after they'd lost a wheel in the growing storm. "Please," Tabitha whispered, her words immediately snatched away by the howling wind. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night approached, and she knew with terrifying certainty that without shelter, neither she nor her unborn child would survive the night. 6 months pregnant and alone in the Wyoming Territory wilderness, Tabitha fought against the growing urge to simply lie down in the snow. Her boots, already worn thin from her journey west, provided little protection against the biting cold. The numbness in her toes was spreading upward, a dangerous sign she recognized from growing up in Massachusetts. Ahead, through the curtain of white, something dark loomed against the horizon. A hill, perhaps, or with God's mercy, some kind of shelter. Tabitha pushed forward, each step requiring more effort than the last. The wind changed direction suddenly, nearly knocking her off her feet. As she stumbled, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Not now, she thought desperately. It's too early. The dark shape grew more distinct as she approached. Not a hill, but a stand of pine trees offering minimal protection from the relentless storm. Tabitha nearly wept with disappointment. She had hoped for a cabin, a barn, anything with walls to block the wind. Still, the trees would provide some shelter. As she reached the first pine, another contraction seized her, stronger this time. Tabitha leaned against the rough bark, breathing through the pain. When it passed, she slid down to sit at the base of the tree, knowing she could go no farther. The snow beneath the pines was shallower, but the bitter cold remained. She tucked her hands under her armpits, trying to conserve what little warmth remained in her body. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered to her unborn child. "I tried." The tears that leaked from her eyes froze on her cheeks. As the light faded from the sky, Tabitha found herself thinking of the home she'd left behind, of her parents' disappointed faces when they learned of her condition, of Henry's cruel dismissal when she told him about the baby. She had staked everything on reaching her cousin in Laramie, her last living relative who might take her in. Now, as consciousness began to slip away, Tabitha wondered if death might be kinder than the life that awaited her as an unwed mother in a world that showed little mercy to women like her. Through the howling wind, she barely registered the sound of hoofbeats. A hallucination, surely her mind offering comfort in her final moments. But then a voice cut through the storm, deep and urgent. "Hello, is someone there?" Tabitha tried to answer, but her voice was frozen in her throat. She managed only a weak cough. It was enough. A large figure dismounted from a horse and approached, crouching before her. Through frost-rimmed eyelashes, Tabitha made out the silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat, a bandana pulled up over his nose and mouth. "Madam." The stranger's voice was tinged with concern. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," Tabitha managed, her voice barely audible. The man's eyes widened as they took in her condition. "Christ Almighty," he muttered, quickly shrugging out of his heavy coat. "You're with child." Before Tabitha could respond, he had wrapped the coat around her shoulders. The sudden warmth was almost painful against her frozen skin. "We need to get you someplace warm and quick," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "My cabin's not far. Can you stand?" Tabitha tried to rise, but another contraction seized her, stronger than before. She gasped, clutching her belly. "The baby," she whispered. "I think it's coming." The stranger's expression was hidden behind his bandana, but his eyes, a startling blue even in the dim light, showed alarm. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Hold on, madam," he said, carrying her toward his horse. "I've got you." The storm seemed to intensify as he settled her on his saddle, then mounted behind her. His arms came around her, one hand holding the reins, the other pressing her securely against his chest. His body was solid and warm against her back, a shield between her and the merciless wind. "Name's Jake Sullivan," he said, his voice close to her ear as he urged the horse forward. "Most folks call me Jake." "Tabitha," she managed through chattering teeth. "Tabitha Mason." "Well, Miss Mason, you hold tight to me now. We're going to get you and that baby somewhere safe." Tabitha leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his steady presence. The horse moved forward through the deepening snow, Jake guiding it with confidence despite the near-zero visibility. Each step jolted through Tabitha's body, aggravating the contractions that were coming with increasing frequency. "It hurts," she gasped as another spasm gripped her. Jake's arm tightened around her. "I know, Miss Mason. Not much further now." Through the swirling snow, Tabitha glimpsed a faint glow in the distance. As they drew closer, the warm yellow light resolved into windows, a cabin nestled in a clearing, smoke curling from the chimney. "There she is," Jake said, a note of relief in his voice. "Home sweet home." He guided his horse to a small stable attached to the cabin, dismounting quickly before reaching up to help Tabitha down. As her feet touched the ground, her knees buckled. Jake caught her, lifting her once more into his arms. "Easy now," he murmured, carrying her toward the cabin door. He kicked it open with his boot, ducking inside with Tabitha cradled against his chest. The warmth hit her like a physical force. The cabin was small but neat, dominated by a stone fireplace where flames danced merrily. A rough-hewn table stood in one corner, a narrow bed in another. Jake carried Tabitha to the bed, setting her down gently on the quilts. "Let's get you warmed up," he said, tugging off her frozen boots. Her stockings beneath were wet with snow, her feet ghostly pale. Another contraction seized her, and Tabitha cried out, clutching her belly. "They're coming faster," she gasped when the pain subsided. Jake ran a hand through his hair, pushing his hat back. "I don't know much about birthing babies, Miss Mason," he admitted, a note of concern in his voice. "Nearest doctor's in Laramie, and there's no way to get there in this storm." "I was trying to reach Laramie," Tabitha said weakly. "My cousin Ellen lives there." "That's a good 20 miles south," Jake said, his brow furrowed. "What were you doing out in this weather alone?" Tabitha closed her eyes briefly. "The stagecoach driver put me out. Said I was slowing them down after they broke a wheel. Said a woman in my condition was bad luck." Jake's jaw tightened visibly. "What kind of man puts a pregnant woman out in a blizzard?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Don't you worry, Miss Mason. I'll see you through this." He moved about the cabin efficiently, adding wood to the fire, heating water in a large pot, gathering clean cloths from a trunk. Tabitha watched him through half-closed eyes, another contraction building within her. This one tore a scream from her throat, her hands fisting in the quilts beneath her. Jake was at her side in an instant, his hand covering hers. "Squeeze as hard as you need to," he said, his voice steady despite the concern in his eyes. When the pain subsided, Tabitha became aware of the wetness spreading beneath her. "My water broke," she whispered, embarrassment and fear warring within her. Jake nodded, his face set in determined lines. "I've helped birth foals and calves." "Can't be that different," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's get you more comfortable." With gentle efficiency, he helped her remove her sodden dress and petticoats, preserving her modesty with blankets. By the time he had positioned her with pillows supporting her back, another contraction gripped her. "I need to see how things are progressing," Jake said, his cheeks coloring slightly. If that's all right. Tabitha nodded, beyond embarrassment now. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not, and this stranger, this cowboy who had found her in the storm, was the only help she had. Jake's hands were surprisingly gentle as he checked her progress, his expression growing more serious. "Baby's coming fast," he said. "When the next pain comes, you'll need to push." The contraction built like a wave, and Tabitha bore down with all her strength, a primal cry tearing from her throat. Jake encouraged her, his steady voice an anchor in the storm of pain. "That's it, Miss Mason. You're doing fine. Rest now, and we'll go again with the next one." Outside, the blizzard raged against the cabin walls, but inside, the world had narrowed to the rhythm of contractions, pushing, and Jake's calm instructions. Time lost meaning as Tabitha labored, drawing strength from the stranger who had become her lifeline. "I can see the head," Jake announced after what seemed like hours. "One more big push should do it." Tabitha gathered her remaining strength, pushing with everything she had as the next contraction seized her. There was a moment of searing pain, then sudden relief as the baby slid into Jake's waiting hands. For a terrifying moment, silence filled the cabin. Then a thin cry pierced the air, growing stronger with each second. Jake's face broke into a wide smile as he laid the squirming infant on Tabitha's chest. "You have a daughter, Miss Mason," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful little girl." Tabitha gazed down at the tiny red face, tears streaming down her cheeks. Despite being early, the baby seemed strong, her cries vigorous, her tiny fists waving in the air. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing a finger along the baby's cheek. "I'm your mama." Jake busied himself with cutting the cord and delivering the afterbirth, then cleaning Tabitha and the baby with the warmed water. His hands were sure and gentle, his gaze occasionally meeting Tabitha's with a look of wonder. "You did real well," he said as he wrapped the baby in a clean flannel shirt. "Both of you." Exhaustion swept over Tabitha as the adrenaline of birth faded. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. "You saved us." Jake shook his head. "You're the one who did all the work. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." He tucked the blankets around mother and child. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." As Tabitha drifted toward sleep, she felt Jake's calloused hand brush a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch as light as a feather. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his face, lined with concern and something softer, watching over her and her newborn daughter. The storm continued through the night, but inside Jake Sullivan's cabin, a new life had begun. Tabitha woke to the soft gurgles of her daughter and the scent of coffee brewing. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar ceiling above, the firm bed beneath her, the strange cabin around her. Then memory returned in a rush. The blizzard, the contractions, the cowboy who had carried her to safety. She turned her head to see Jake sitting at the rough-hewn table, whittling a small piece of wood. The morning light streaming through the windows caught in his dark hair, revealing strands of auburn she hadn't noticed the night before. He'd shaved, and without the shadow of beard, he looked younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his knife pausing mid-stroke. A smile transformed his face, softening the weathered features. "Good morning," he said, setting aside his work and rising. "How are you feeling?" Tabitha took mental inventory of her body. She was sore. God, was she sore, but the bone-deep chill of yesterday was gone, replaced by the warmth of the cabin. "Better," she answered, her voice raspy from screaming during labor. "Thirsty?" Jake immediately poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, crossing to her side. He helped her sit up slightly, mindful of the baby nestled beside her, and held the cup to her lips. The water was cold and sweet, easing the dryness in her throat. "Thank you," she said as he withdrew the cup. "For everything. We would have died out there if not for you." Jake's expression grew serious. "No thanks needed, Miss Mason. Couldn't leave you out there." He glanced at the baby, a softness entering his eyes. "She's a fighter, your little girl, born early in a blizzard and crying strong as a mountain lion." Tabitha smiled, looking down at her daughter. In the light of day, she could see the baby had a dusting of dark hair and her own chin. The rest, she tried not to think about the parts that might resemble Henry. "Have you thought of a name?" Jake asked, settling back on his stool beside the bed. Tabitha hesitated. She had considered naming the baby after her mother, Elizabeth, but now it seemed wrong. This child had been born in the wild frontier, not the prim parlors of Massachusetts. "Hope," she said finally, the name coming to her suddenly. "Her name is Hope." Jake nodded, approval clear in his blue eyes. "Suits her. Born in a storm, bringing hope with her." The baby Hope began to fuss, her little face scrunching in hunger. Tabitha adjusted her nightgown to feed her, turning slightly away from Jake out of modesty. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, standing abruptly. "Need to check on the horses anyway." He pulled on his coat and hat, and with a nod, stepped outside into the bright morning. Through the window, Tabitha watched him trudge through the deep snow toward the small stable attached to the cabin. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed world of white drifts and crystal-laden trees glittering in the sunlight. Hope suckled hungrily, her tiny hand resting against Tabitha's breast. Looking down at her daughter, a fierce love swept through Tabitha, alongside an equally powerful fear. How would she provide for this child? Where would they go when she recovered enough to travel? Her cousin Ellen in Laramie had only reluctantly agreed to take her in temporarily, and that was before knowing the baby would arrive early. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold air as Jake returned, stamping snow from his boots. He carried a bucket of milk in one hand, fresh from his cow, he explained as he set it on the table. "Storms passed, but the snow's deep," he reported, hanging his coat on a peg. "Trail to town won't be passable for a few days at least." Tabitha felt a knot form in her stomach. "I've imposed on your hospitality enough," she began. "Perhaps if you could lend me a horse—" "You're not going anywhere for at least a week," Jake interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "You just had a baby, Miss Mason, in a blizzard. Even if the trails were clear, which they ain't, you need time to heal." "I can't stay here," Tabitha protested. "This is your home, and I'm a stranger with a newborn." Jake's expression softened. "I've got nowhere to be and plenty of supplies to see us through. Besides," he added with a small smile, "been a while since I had company out here. Gets lonely, talking to horses all day." Tabitha wanted to argue further, but exhaustion pulled at her, and Hope had fallen asleep at her breast. With careful movements, she adjusted her clothing and settled the baby beside her. "Rest," Jake said, his voice gentle. "We can talk more later." Unable to fight the weariness any longer, Tabitha closed her eyes, drifting into sleep with the sounds of Jake moving quietly around the cabin as her lullaby. The next few days passed in a blur of nursing, sleeping, and slowly regaining her strength. Jake proved to be a surprisingly considerate host, giving Tabitha privacy when she needed it, and engaging in easy conversation when she felt up to company. He cooked simple but hearty meals, insisted she take his bed while he slept on a pallet by the fire, and even fashioned a small cradle for Hope from a wooden crate, lining it with soft blankets. On the third morning, when Tabitha felt strong enough to sit at the table for breakfast, she found the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, cradling a cup of coffee between her hands. Jake, he corrected with a smile. Think we're past formalities, Miss Mason. Tabitha, then, she replied. Jake, I've been wondering. Why were you out in that blizzard? It seems providential that you found me, but what brought you there? Jake's expression grew somber as he added wood to the fire. Was coming back from checking my line traps. Got a few set in the hills for winter pelts. He straightened, turning to face her. Truth is, I nearly stayed at my friend's place in town when the storm hit. Something told me to head home instead. He shrugged, a hint of color touching his cheeks. Call it a hunch, or maybe divine intervention. Tabitha nodded, thinking of how close she and Hope had come to perishing in the snow. I'm grateful, whatever the reason. Jake studied her for a moment, hesitation clear in his face. Can I ask you something, Tabitha? Don't mean to pry, but I've been wondering. About the father, she guessed, her fingers tightening around her cup. Jake nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Tabitha took a deep breath. She owed him the truth, at least. His name is Henry Blackwell. He is a banker's son from Boston. We were to be married. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. When I told him about the baby, he denied it was his, said I must have been with someone else. His family had political ambitions for him, you see. A scandal would have ruined those plans. Jake's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. Sounds like a coward, he said, his voice low. He offered me money to take care of it, Tabitha continued, her voice steady despite the old pain. When I refused, he threatened to ruin my reputation completely if I tried to name him as the father. My parents. She swallowed hard. They believed him over me, said no daughter of theirs would bring such shame to the family. They gave me enough money for a ticket west and told me not to return. I'm sorry, Jake said simply, and the genuine compassion in his voice nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. My cousin Ellen is a seamstress in Laramie, Tabitha said, changing the subject slightly. She agreed to take me in until I could find work. I was hoping to reach her before the baby came, but she glanced at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle. This little one had other plans, Jake finished with a gentle smile. Yes, Tabitha agreed, returning his smile. Though I can't help wondering what Ellen will say when I arrive with a newborn instead of being 6 months along. Jake was quiet for a moment, pouring more coffee for them both before speaking. What kind of work were you hoping to find? I was a school teacher in Massachusetts, Tabitha replied. But I doubt anyone will hire an unwed mother to teach their children, even out here. Don't be so sure, Jake said. Frontier towns are desperate for educated folks. Laramie's growing fast might be they'd look past your circumstances if it means their children learn their letters. Tabitha appreciated his optimism, though she remained doubtful. She had seen how quickly society turned its back on women who violated its rules, regardless of circumstances. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, Jake telling her about his small ranch, his 4 horses and 2 milk cows, the vegetable garden he maintained in the warmer months. He had been in Wyoming territory for 6 years, he explained, coming west after the war with dreams of open spaces and a fresh start. Never did cotton to city life, he admitted. Too many people, too many rules. Out here a man can breathe. Tabitha found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. Jake Sullivan was different from the men she had known back east, less polished, perhaps, but more genuine. He spoke his mind plainly but kindly, and treated her with a respect that asked nothing in return. By the 5th day, Tabitha was well enough to move around the cabin freely, though she tired easily. Jake had ventured out on horseback to check his trap lines, returning with 2 rabbits for their supper. Tabitha insisted on cooking, grateful for the chance to repay some small portion of his kindness. As they ate by lamplight, Hope sleeping contentedly nearby, Tabitha found herself studying Jake's profile. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and those startlingly blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His hands were calloused from work, but they had been so gentle when he delivered Hope, when he checked Tabitha's fever in those first difficult days. "What?" Jake asked, catching her gaze. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks at being caught staring. "I was just thinking how strange life is," she said, not entirely untruthfully. "A week ago I didn't know you existed. Now I owe you everything." Jake shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Tabitha. Any decent man would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that," she replied softly. "The stagecoach driver didn't think twice about leaving me to die." Jake's expression darkened. "Some men don't deserve the name," he said. "If I ever cross paths with that driver—" "It doesn't matter now," Tabitha said quickly. "Hope and I survived, thanks to you." Jake was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he set down his fork and looked directly at her. "The trail to Laramie should be passable in another day or two," he said. "But I've been thinking you don't have to go right away. You could stay here a while longer, until spring maybe. Give yourself and Hope time to get stronger before making the journey." Tabitha stared at him, surprised by the offer. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose for months." "It's no imposition," Jake insisted. "Place feels different with you both here, better." He looked away, a hint of color in his cheeks. "I've got the space and it'd be safer for the little one. Winter travels hard on grown folks, let alone newborns." Tabitha considered his words. He made practical sense. Traveling with Hope in winter would be difficult and dangerous. And the thought of staying in this peaceful cabin, with its warm fire and the man who had saved them, was more appealing than she wanted to admit. "What would people say?" she asked finally. "An unmarried woman living with a bachelor." Jake met her eyes steadily. "Out here, folks mind their business better than back east. But if it bothers you, we could say you're my widowed sister, come to stay after losing your husband." The suggestion was reasonable, but something in Tabitha rebelled against more lies. She had spent the past 6 months living with shame and secrets. The thought of building a new life on falsehoods, even well-intentioned ones, felt wrong. "I appreciate the offer, Jake, truly," she said. "But I need to stand on my own feet, for Hope's sake as well as mine." Disappointment flickered in Jake's eyes, though he nodded in understanding. "The offer stands if you change your mind, and either way, I'll take you to Laramie myself when you're ready." "Thank you," Tabitha said softly. Later that night, as she nursed Hope before sleep, Tabitha found herself second-guessing her decision. The prospect of arriving in Laramie, a strange town where she knew only her reluctant cousin with a newborn, and no immediate prospects for work, filled her with dread. Yet the alternative, staying here with Jake, presented its own complications. She was already growing too fond of him, too aware of his presence when he moved around the cabin, too comforted by the sound of his breathing as he slept near the hearth. Such feelings were dangerous for a woman in her position. She had trusted a man once before, with disastrous consequences. Could she risk her heart and Hope's future again so soon? As if sensing her mother's turmoil, Hope fussed at her breast. Tabitha stroked her daughter's cheek, soothing her back to nursing. "What should we do, little one?" she whispered. "Where do we belong?" Hope offered no answer beyond her contented suckling, but as Tabitha gazed down at her tiny face, she felt a resolve growing within her. Whatever she decided, it would be for Hope's welfare first and foremost. Her daughter deserved a stable home, a life free from the shadows of scandal and shame that had driven Tabitha west. Whether that home would be in Laramie or here in Jake Sullivan's cabin, Tabitha couldn't yet say. But for the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she felt a tentative hope for the future, a future that might hold more than mere survival. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the snow sparkling like diamonds in the early light. Tabitha woke to find Jake already gone, a note on the table explaining he had ridden to check the trail to town and would return by midday. A pot of coffee kept warm on the stove, and fresh bread sat wrapped in a cloth beside it. Tabitha fed Hope, then wrapped her snugly before venturing outside for the first time since Jake had carried her in from the blizzard. The cold air filled her lungs, invigorating after days confined to the cabin. Holding Hope close against her chest, protected under her borrowed shawl, Tabitha walked carefully around the small homestead. Jake's cabin sat in a natural clearing surrounded by pines, with a small stable attached to one side. Beyond, she could see a corral for the horses, currently empty, and what looked like a storage shed a short distance away. Behind the cabin, a narrow stream, partially frozen, gurgled beneath the ice. It was a modest place, but well-maintained and thoughtfully arranged. As she completed her circuit of the cabin, Tabitha noticed a small plot nearby, bordered by stones. Drawing closer, she realized it was a grave, marked with a simple wooden cross. The name carved into the crosspiece read Margaret Sullivan, beloved wife, 1848–1868. Tabitha stood very still, absorbing this new information. Jake had been married. His wife had died recently, it seemed, just 3 years ago. He had never mentioned her, not once in their many conversations over the past days. The sound of hoofbeats announced Jake's return before Tabitha could process her discovery fully. She turned to see him riding toward the cabin, his expression brightening as he spotted her standing outside. "Should you be up and about?" he called as he dismounted, leading his horse toward the stable. "I needed some fresh air," Tabitha replied, following him. "Hope too." Jake removed his horse's saddle, speaking as he worked. "Trail's clearing nicely. Another day should do it." He glanced at her. "How are you feeling?" "Strong enough to travel." Tabitha hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the grave she had discovered. Jake followed her gaze, his expression sobering as understanding dawned. "Ah," he said quietly, "you found Maggie's resting place." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said. "I didn't mean to pry." Jake shook his head, his hands stilling on the horse's bridle. "Nothing to be sorry for. I should have mentioned her." He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "Influenza took her, winter of '68. We'd been married less than a year." "That's terrible," Tabitha said softly. "You must have loved her very much." Jake nodded, resuming his work with the horse. "She was a good woman, daughter of a rancher over in the next valley. We had plans, children, a bigger place eventually." His voice grew distant with memory. "Funny thing is, I was in town getting medicine for her when the worst of it hit, by the time I got back." He trailed off, then shrugged, a gesture that did nothing to mask the pain still evident in his eyes. "Well, that's life out here, beautiful but harsh." Tabitha approached him, adjusting Hope in her arms. "Is that why you were alone that night? Why you rode out in the blizzard when others stayed in town?" Jake met her eyes, something vulnerable in his gaze. "Maybe. After Maggie, being alone suited me, or I thought it did." He reached out hesitantly, his finger gently touching Hope's cheek where she peeked out from the shawl. "Finding you both. It reminded me there's more to life than just surviving day to day." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Hope squirmed, breaking the spell, and Jake stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get you two inside before the little one catches cold," he said, his tone lightening. "Made some progress on that cradle while I was in town yesterday. Proper one this time, not just a box." As they walked back to the cabin together, Tabitha felt a shift in her understanding of Jake Sullivan. He had known loss, profound loss, yet had opened his home and heart to her, and hope without hesitation. The offer to stay until spring took on new meaning with this knowledge. Was he simply being kind to a woman in need, or was there more to his invitation inside? Jake showed her the cradle he was crafting from pine boards. It was simple but beautifully made, with smooth edges and gentle curves. He had even begun carving a pattern of stars along the sides. "It's beautiful," Tabitha said, genuinely touched by the effort he had put into it. "Hope will sleep like an angel in such a fine bed." Jake smiled, pleased by her approval. "Should be finished by tomorrow," he said, "just in time for—" He hesitated, leaving the thought unfinished. "For what?" Tabitha prompted. Jake ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncertain. "Well, for whatever you decide. About staying or going." Tabitha felt a flutter in her chest at the naked hope in his expression. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her words. They both turned, startled by the unexpected visitor. Jake crossed to the door, opening it to reveal a man bundled against the cold, his horse stamping impatiently behind him. "Tommy," Jake greeted, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you out this way?" "Message from town," the man replied, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Doc Wilson's asking if you've seen a young woman, pregnant, traveling alone. Stage driver finally admitted to leaving her out in the storm when he got back to town. Search party's been looking for days, but most folks think she's long dead." Jake glanced back at Tabitha, who stood frozen by the fire, hope clutched protectively to her chest. "She's here," Jake said, stepping aside to reveal Tabitha to the visitor. "Miss Mason and her daughter are both safe." The man Tommy stared at Tabitha in astonishment, then at the baby in her arms. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Beggin' your pardon, madam, everyone in town thought—" "She arrived early," Jake explained, moving to stand beside Tabitha. "Miss Mason delivered right here, night of the storm." Tommy shook his head in wonder. "That's some miracle, madam. Doc will want to check you both over, I expect. And there's a lady in town been asking after you, says she's your cousin, come from Laramie when she heard about the stagecoach." "Ellen," Tabitha gasped. "Ellen's in town," Tommy nodded. "Arrived yesterday, all worried. Been staying at the boarding house." Tabitha's mind raced. Ellen had come looking for her, had traveled all the way from Laramie when she heard Tabitha was missing. Perhaps her cousin cared more than Tabitha had believed. "Can you ride back to town?" Jake asked Tommy. "Tell them Miss Mason and her baby are well, and that I'll bring them in tomorrow if the doctor thinks they're strong enough to travel." Tommy agreed readily, clearly eager to deliver the surprising news. After he departed, Jake turned to Tabitha, his expression carefully neutral. "Seems like your cousin saved you the journey to Laramie," he said. "Yes," Tabitha replied, her thoughts in turmoil. The decision about staying or leaving had suddenly become immediate rather than theoretical. "I should see her. Let her know we're all right." Jake nodded, moving to add wood to the fire. "Of course. We'll head to town first thing tomorrow if you feel up to it." Tabitha watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided her gaze. "Jake," she said softly, "about your offer." He straightened, finally meeting her eyes. "It still stands," he said quietly, "but I understand if your plans have changed. Your cousin's come all this way." Tabitha looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at Jake. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Ellen coming to find me changes things, but, Jake prompted when she hesitated. "But I've been happier here these past days, despite everything, than I've been in a long time," Tabitha finished, her cheeks warming at the admission. Jake's expression softened. "Been happier too," he said simply. They stood looking at each other across the small cabin, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Hope stirred, letting out a hungry cry, and the moment broke as Tabitha turned her attention to her daughter. "Let's get through tomorrow," Jake suggested as Tabitha settled in the chair to nurse. "See what the doctor says, talk to your cousin. You don't have to decide everything right away." Tabitha nodded, grateful for his understanding. As she fed Hope, her mind continued to spin with possibilities. Tomorrow would bring reunion with Ellen, explanations, decisions about the future. But for tonight, she was still here in this warm cabin with the man who had saved them, and that was enough. The following morning dawned bright and cold, the snow sparkling under a clear blue sky. Tabitha dressed carefully in her now cleaned dress, which Jake had mended where it had torn during her desperate journey through the blizzard. Hope was wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, another of Jake's unexpected skills revealed when he'd produced it from a trunk, explaining that his mother had taught him to knit during the long winter evenings of his childhood. Jake harnessed his two strongest horses to a small sleigh, lining it with hay and extra blankets to keep Tabitha and Hope warm during the journey to town. His movements were methodical, his expression thoughtful as he worked. "It's about an hour's ride," he explained as he helped Tabitha into the sleigh, handing Hope up to her once she was settled. "Town's not much: general store, saloon, doctor's office, boarding house, and a handful of homes. But it's growing." The journey passed in comfortable silence, broken only by Jake occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the area. Tabitha found herself memorizing the landscape, the snow-covered hills, the stands of pine trees, the distant mountains blue against the horizon. Whether she stayed or left, she wanted to remember this place that had become a sanctuary in her time of greatest need. As they crested a small rise, the town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, smoke rising from chimneys against the winter sky. Jake guided the horses down the slope, and soon they were passing the first outlying structures. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from doorways, pointing and calling to others. By the time Jake drew the sleigh to a halt outside the doctor's office, a small crowd had gathered. "Word travels fast," Jake murmured, helping Tabitha down. "You ready for this?" Before she could answer, the door to the doctor's office flew open, and a woman rushed out, a woman Tabitha recognized instantly despite the years since they'd last met. "Tabitha!" Ellen cried, hurrying forward. "Oh, thank God!" Ellen Mason had always been the practical one among Tabitha's relatives, sensible, straightforward, with little patience for sentimentality. But now her eyes were wet with tears as she embraced Tabitha carefully, mindful of the baby between them. "When I got your letter saying you were coming, then heard about the stagecoach." Ellen pulled back, examining Tabitha's face. "I thought I'd lost you before I even had a chance to make things right." "Make things right?" Tabitha echoed, confused. Ellen's expression grew pained. "For not standing by you when your parents cast you out. I should have offered to come east to help you. Instead, I just sent money and a reluctant invitation." She looked down at Hope, her expression softening. "And this must be my little niece." "This is Hope," Tabitha confirmed, adjusting the blanket to reveal the baby's face. Ellen gazed at the infant with wonder. "She's beautiful, Tabitha, truly a miracle after what you've been through." She looked up, noticing Jake for the first time. "And you must be the man who saved them." Jake removed his hat respectfully. "Jake Sullivan, madam, just did what anyone would." "Not anyone," Ellen said firmly. "That stagecoach driver certainly didn't. The whole town's been in an uproar since he confessed what he did." She turned back to Tabitha. "Doctor Wilson wants to examine you both right away. He's been worried sick since learning what happened." Tabitha glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he said. "I'll see to the horses and come back to check on you later." As he turned to leave, Tabitha impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jake's eyes held hers for a moment, warm with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "Any time," he replied, equally quiet, before turning to lead the horses toward the livery stable. Ellen watched this exchange with interest, but said nothing as she guided Tabitha into the doctor's office. "Doctor." Wilson, a kindly older man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted them warmly, expressing both relief at Tabitha's survival and outrage at the stagecoach driver's actions. "Criminal, simply criminal," he muttered as he examined Hope, pronouncing her remarkably healthy despite her early arrival and dramatic birth. "That man should be brought up on charges." His examination of Tabitha was equally thorough but gentle. "You're healing well," he concluded, "but you must continue to rest. No traveling for at least another 2 weeks, I'd say. The journey from Mr. Sullivan's cabin was risk enough." Ellen, who had waited discreetly behind a screen during the examination, rejoined them as Tabitha read rest. "Then it's settled," she said decisively. "You'll come stay with me at the boarding house until you're strong enough to travel to Laramie." Tabitha hesitated, thinking of Jake's offer to stay at his cabin until spring. "Ellen, there's something I should tell you." A commotion outside interrupted her words. Raised voices, then the distinctive sound of fists meeting flesh. Dr. Wilson hurried to the window, peering out with a frown. "Oh dear," he muttered. "It seems Mr. Sullivan has encountered Mr. Bennett." "The stagecoach driver," Tabitha guessed, moving to join him at the window. Outside, Jake had Bennett, a burly man with a red face and mutton chop whiskers, pinned against the wall of the general store. Though Jake was the leaner of the two, his face was set in grim lines as he spoke, one forearm pressed against the driver's throat. "I can't hear what they're saying, Doctor," Wilson said, "but I imagine Mr. Sullivan is expressing his displeasure regarding your treatment." As they watched, several townsmen approached, not to separate the men but to stand beside Jake, their postures clearly supportive. Bennett's face grew redder as Jake released him with a final warning, stepping back but remaining tense, ready to strike again if necessary. "Well," Ellen said from behind them, "your Mr. Sullivan seems to have strong feelings on the matter." "He's not my Mr. Sullivan," Tabitha protested automatically, though her heart had leapt at the sight of Jake defending her honor. Ellen raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "In any case, we should get you settled at the boarding house. Mrs. Parker has prepared a room for us, with space for a cradle." Again, Tabitha hesitated. "Ellen, Mr. Sullivan has offered to let Hope and me stay at his cabin until spring. He thinks winter travel would be too hard on the baby." Ellen's expression registered surprise, then thoughtfulness. "I see," she said carefully. "And what do you think of this offer?" Tabitha looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I don't know," she admitted. "His cabin is small but comfortable. He's been nothing but kind and respectful, and Hope seems content there." "And you?" Ellen pressed gently. "Are you content there as well?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Tabitha wasn't sure she was ready to address. Before she could formulate an answer, the door opened and Jake entered, his knuckles reddened but his expression composed. "Doctor," he nodded to Wilson. "Ladies, I trust everything is well." "Mother and child are doing remarkably well," Dr. Wilson assured him. "You did a fine job delivering that baby, Mr. Sullivan. Not many men would have kept their heads in such a situation." Jake's cheeks colored slightly at the praise. "Had some experience with foaling," he said modestly. "Not so different when it comes down to it." Despite the tension of the moment, Tabitha couldn't help smiling at his discomfort with the compliment. Jake caught her eye, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at her or Hope. Ellen observed this exchange with keen eyes. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her tone direct but not unfriendly, "I understand you've offered my cousin and her daughter shelter at your home." Jake straightened slightly, meeting Ellen's gaze directly. "Yes, madam. My place isn't fancy, but it's warm and safe." The trail to Laramie's treacherous this time of year, especially with a newborn. He glanced at Tabitha. "Of course, it's entirely Miss Mason's decision." Ellen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Tabitha. "Would you allow Mr. Sullivan and me a few minutes alone? There are matters I'd like to discuss with him." Surprise flickered across Jake's face, but he nodded his agreement. Tabitha, equally startled by the request, hesitated before acquiescing. "I'll wait in the reception area," she said, carrying Hope through to the outer office. The next 15 minutes seemed interminable as Tabitha sat in the hard wooden chair, wondering what Ellen could possibly be saying to Jake. When they finally emerged, Ellen's expression was satisfied, while Jake looked somewhat dazed but not unhappy. "Tabitha," Ellen said, her voice brisk but kind, "I believe Mr. Sullivan's offer has merit. The doctor agrees that travel would be unwise for you and Hope at present." She glanced at Jake. "I'll be returning to Laramie tomorrow to settle my affairs. I've decided to relocate here permanently." "You have?" Tabitha exclaimed, astonished. "But your seamstress business can be established anywhere," Ellen finished firmly. "This town is growing and needs skilled workers. And you," she added, her expression softening, "need family close by." Tabitha looked between Ellen and Jake, sensing there was more to this sudden decision than her cousin was revealing. "What exactly did you two discuss?" Jake cleared his throat. "Your cousin had some concerns about the propriety of your staying at my cabin. Understandable concerns," he added hastily. "I assured her my intentions are honorable." "Honorable," Tabitha repeated, the word hanging in the air between them, laden with possible meanings. Ellen's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. Mr. Sullivan has agreed that upon my return in 2 weeks' time, we will reassess the situation. In the meantime, you and Hope will remain under his care, with the understanding that your reputation will be preserved." There was something Ellen wasn't saying, something in the way she looked at Jake, in the way he shifted slightly under her gaze. But before Tabitha could press further, Mrs. Parker from the boarding house arrived with a basket of provisions, fresh bread, preserves, a roasted chicken, and other supplies. "For your journey back," she explained, handing the basket to Jake, "and a few things for the baby." She beamed at Hope. "News of your miracle has spread through town, Miss Mason. We're all so relieved you're safe." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of visitors, townspeople coming to express their relief at Tabitha's survival, to coo over Hope, to thank Jake for his heroism. By late afternoon, Tabitha was exhausted, and Dr. Wilson insisted they return to the cabin before darkness fell. The journey back was quiet, Tabitha too tired for conversation, Jake seemingly lost in thought. Hope slept contentedly in Tabitha's arms, undisturbed by the gentle motion of the sleigh over the snow. As they approached the cabin, golden in the late afternoon light with smoke curling from the chimney, Tabitha felt a surprising sense of homecoming. This place, which had been a stranger's dwelling just a week ago, now felt familiar and safe. Jake helped her down from the sleigh, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Welcome back," he said softly, and something in his tone made Tabitha wonder if he felt it too, this strange sense that they belonged here together. Inside, the cabin was warm, the fire having been banked to last during their absence. Jake busied himself stoking it back to life while Tabitha settled Hope in her temporary cradle. "Your cousin is quite formidable," Jake said finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Tabitha smiled. "Ellen has always been direct. What exactly did she say to you?" Jake looked up from the fire, his expression a mix of amusement and respect. "She asked my intentions toward you and Hope." "And what did you tell her?" Tabitha asked, her heart suddenly beating faster. Jake straightened, crossing to where she stood. "I told her the truth," he said simply. "That finding you in that blizzard changed something in me, that I've come to care for you both more than I thought possible in so short a time." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "That I'd like the chance to see if what I'm feeling might grow into something more with time." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. "Jake, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I know it's too soon, too fast. You've been through so much and you have Hope to think about. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. "I wanted you to know where I stand." Tabitha studied his face, the earnestness in his blue eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination and honesty. In the short time she'd known him, Jake Sullivan had proven himself to be a man of integrity, of kindness, of unexpected gentleness. "What did Ellen say when you told her this?" she asked. A smile tugged at Jake's lips. "She said if I hurt either of you, she'd skin me alive and use my hide for boot leather." Tabitha laughed despite herself. "That sounds like Ellen." "She also said," Jake continued, his voice growing more serious, "that she's never seen you look at anyone the way you look at me." Tabitha felt warmth flood her cheeks. Was she so transparent? Did she? Jake nodded, taking a step closer. "Is she right, Tabitha? Is there a chance you might come to feel something for me too?" The question hung between them, fraught with possibility. Tabitha thought of Henry's betrayal, of the long months of shame and fear, of the journey west that had nearly ended in tragedy. Then she thought of Jake finding her in the storm, of his arms carrying her to safety, of his hands guiding Hope into the world, of his quiet strength and unwavering support in the days since. "I think," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I already do." Jake's expression transformed, hope and joy lighting his features. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he enfolded her fingers in his. "I know it's early days," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have time, all the time we need." Tabitha nodded, a weight lifting from her heart. There were still challenges ahead, decisions to make, a future to build, a child to raise. But for the first time in months, that future seemed bright with promise rather than shadowed by fear. Hope stirred in her cradle, making the soft noises that signaled she would soon wake hungry. Tabitha turned toward her daughter, Jake's hand still holding hers. "She has perfect timing," Jake said with a smile, "always breaking up our important moments." "She'll be doing that for years to come, I expect," Tabitha replied without thinking. Jake's hand tightened around hers. "Years," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." As Tabitha lifted Hope into her arms, she caught Jake watching them, his expression filled with a tenderness that made her heart swell. Whatever path lay ahead, she knew with sudden certainty that they would walk it together. The winter that had nearly claimed their lives became instead the season that gave them a new beginning. Spring came to the Wyoming territory in fits, and starts warm days followed by sudden snowfalls. The land caught between seasons like a breath held too long. By March, the worst of the winter had passed, and the trail to town remained clear enough for regular travel. Ellen had returned as promised, establishing herself in a small cottage on the edge of town, where she quickly built a reputation as the finest seamstress for miles around. Tabitha and Hope remained at Jake's cabin. What had begun as a temporary arrangement gradually transformed into something more permanent, though nothing was officially decided. Ellen's presence in town silenced most of the potential gossip. Her frequent visits to the cabin and her obvious approval of Jake provided a thin veneer of propriety to the unusual situation. As the snow retreated and the first green shoots appeared, Jake began teaching Tabitha about ranch life. She proved a quick study, learning to milk the cows, tend the newly planted garden, and even assist with the horses. Hope grew stronger each day, her personality emerging curious, determined, quick to smile, especially at Jake, who doted on her with unabashed devotion. "She's going to be walking before we know it," Jake observed one evening as Hope practiced rolling over on a blanket spread before the hearth. "Probably riding too, if I have any say in it." Tabitha smiled, watching him watch the baby. Over the months, Jake's affection for Hope had deepened into something that looked remarkably like fatherly love. He sang to her, carved wooden toys for her tiny hands, and spent hours simply talking to her as he worked around the cabin, explaining everything from how to properly groom a horse to why the sky was blue. "She could have no better teacher," Tabitha said softly. Jake looked up, meeting her eyes across the small space. They had grown comfortable with each other in the passing months, building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared daily tasks. Yet there remained an unspoken awareness between them, a current of feeling neither had fully acknowledged since that conversation after their return from town. "Been thinking," Jake said, his tone casual though his eyes were serious. "Cabin's getting a bit cramped. Was considering adding another room come summer." Tabitha's hands stilled in her mending. "Another room," Jake nodded, his attention seemingly focused on Hope, though Tabitha could see the slight tension in his shoulders. "Figure the little one will need her own space eventually, and maybe—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Maybe you'd like a proper bedroom too, one with a door." The implication hung in the air between them. Since her arrival, Tabitha had slept in Jake's bed while he took the pallet by the fire. The arrangement had been born of necessity and maintained out of propriety, though as winter deepened into spring, Tabitha had found herself increasingly aware of Jake's proximity each night, his steady breathing, the occasional murmur in his sleep, the solid presence of him just a few feet away. "Jake," she began, setting aside her sewing, "are you asking me to stay, permanently, I mean?" He met her gaze directly then, his blue eyes clear and earnest. "I'm asking for more than that, Tabitha, and you know it." Her heart quickened. "Do I?" Jake rose from his place by Hope, crossing to sit beside Tabitha on the bench. "I've been patient," he said, his voice low. "Tried to give you time, space to heal and find your footing. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just friendship, or that I'm content with this arrangement staying as it is." Tabitha swallowed, emotion rising in her throat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Jake said simply. "You and Hope both. I'm saying I want us to be a family, a real one, proper and legal." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I'm asking you to marry me, Tabitha Mason." Though the words were not unexpected, Tabitha found herself momentarily speechless. In the months since the blizzard, her feelings for Jake had grown deeper, stronger, evolving from gratitude to friendship to something far more profound. Yet a part of her, the part still scarred by Henry's betrayal, had held back, afraid to trust fully, to believe that such happiness could be hers. "You don't have to answer right away," Jake added quickly, misinterpreting her silence. "I know it's a big decision, especially considering how we met and with Hope to think about." "Yes," Tabitha interrupted, finding her voice at last. "My answer is yes, Jake." It was his turn to look stunned. "Yes," Tabitha smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, have for months now, I think, though I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." Joy transformed Jake's face, years seeming to fall away as he broke into a wide smile. He reached for her, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he murmured against her hair. Their first kiss was tentative, sweet with the newness of expressed love. The second was deeper, years of loneliness and longing dissolved in the warmth of found belonging. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hope's curious gurgle reminded them they weren't alone. Jake laughed, keeping one arm around Tabitha as he reached down to scoop Hope up with the other. "What do you think, little one? Ready to make it official?" Hope batted at his chin with a chubby hand, her expression serious as if considering the question. Then she broke into a gummy smile that made both adults laugh. "I think that's a yes," Tabitha said, leaning her head against Jake's shoulder, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church that had been built in town over the winter. Ellen stood as Tabitha's witness, proudly holding Hope during the ceremony. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the same people who had once feared Tabitha, lost to the blizzard, now celebrating her happiness. The bride wore a dress of pale blue silk that Ellen had crafted as a wedding gift, with tiny pearl buttons down the back that had taken Jake's fumbling fingers nearly 10 minutes to fasten before the ceremony. Hope was dressed in a miniature gown of matching fabric, a crown of spring wildflowers adorning her dark curls. "Never seen a prettier sight," the Reverend declared as Tabitha walked down the short aisle toward Jake, who stood waiting in a new suit, his expression one of wonder and devotion. The vows were simple, traditional, yet weighted with meaning for the couple who had found each other in the most desperate of circumstances. When Jake slipped the ring, a delicate gold band that had once belonged to his mother, onto Tabitha's finger, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the depth of his emotion. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend announced, beaming at the couple. "Mr. Sullivan, you may kiss your bride." Jake gathered Tabitha gently in his arms, his kiss tender but filled with promise. The small church erupted in cheers and applause, Hope adding her own excited babble to the celebration. The wedding feast that followed was a community affair, with every family contributing dishes to the long tables set up outside the church. As spring sunshine bathed the gathering in golden light, Tabitha found herself surrounded by people who had become friends in the months since her arrival, the doctor who had examined her, and Hope after their ordeal, the shopkeeper who saved special candies for her visits to town, the blacksmith's wife who had knitted tiny booties for Hope. "You look happy," Ellen observed, joining Tabitha at the edge of the celebration. "It suits you." Tabitha smiled, watching as Jake showed Hope off to a group of admiring ranchers, his pride evident in every gesture. "I am happy," she confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible after everything that happened." Ellen nodded, following her gaze. "He's a good man. Not at all what I imagined for you when we were girls dreaming of our futures, but exactly what you need." "What we both need," Tabitha corrected gently. Jake was as alone as I was in his way. "Not anymore," Ellen said, squeezing her cousin's hand. "Neither of you are alone anymore." As the celebration continued into evening, Jake found Tabitha sitting with Hope asleep in her arms. He settled beside her on the bench, his arm coming naturally around her shoulders. "Ready to head home, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, the new name bringing a flush of pleasure to Tabitha's cheeks. "Home," she repeated softly. "Yes, I think we are." They said their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and well wishes from the townspeople. Ellen took Hope for one last cuddle before handing her back, promising to visit in a few days. The ride back to the cabin, their cabin now, truly was peaceful, the spring evening filled with the sounds of awakening nature. Jake had decorated the small homestead for their return, hanging paper lanterns from the porch and scattering wildflowers along the path to the door. "It's beautiful," Tabitha said as he helped her down from the wagon, Hope still sleeping soundly in her arms. "Not as beautiful as you," Jake replied, his eyes warm in the lantern light. "Still can't believe you're really my wife." Tabitha smiled up at him. "Believe it, Jake Sullivan. You're stuck with us now." He laughed softly, leaning down to kiss her. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They settled Hope in her cradle, the same one Jake had crafted during those early days, now embellished with carved flowers and painted stars. The baby sighed in her sleep, one tiny hand curled against her cheek. "She looks like you," Jake observed, his voice hushed. "Same chin, same determined expression." Tabitha smiled, touched by his words. They had never spoken much about Hope's biological father, that phantom presence from Tabitha's past. It had seemed unnecessary, as Jake had claimed the role of father in all the ways that mattered from the moment of Hope's birth. "Jake," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. Would you consider legally adopting Hope, making her your daughter in name as well as heart?" Jake's expression softened, his eyes suddenly bright with emotion. "You don't even need to ask," he said. "I've thought of her as mine since the night she was born. Nothing would make me prouder than to give her my name." Tabitha reached for his hand, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you, Jake Sullivan." "And I love you, Tabitha Sullivan," he replied, drawing her into his arms. "Both of you more than I have words to say." As night settled over the Wyoming prairie, the small cabin glowed with warmth and light, a beacon of home and family, of love found in the most desperate of circumstances. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, witnesses to the miracle that had begun on a night of bitter cold and had blossomed into this. Two lives joined, a family created, a future bright with promise. In the years that followed, Tabitha would often think back to that terrible night in the blizzard, how close she had come to giving up, how fate or providence had guided Jake Sullivan to find her in the vast whiteness. What had seemed like the darkest moment of her life had instead been the beginning of her greatest joy. Hope grew into a strong, curious child with her mother's determination and her father's love of the land. She was joined 2 years later by a brother, Jacob Jr., and 2 years after that by twin girls, Margaret and Elizabeth. The cabin expanded accordingly, Jake adding rooms as their family grew, until it became a proper ranch house with a wide porch where Tabitha would sit in the evenings, watching her children play while Jake tended the growing herd of horses that had become their livelihood. Ellen remained in town, her business thriving as the community expanded. She never married but considered Tabitha's children her own in many ways, spoiling them with handmade clothes and stories of their mother's childhood back east. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howled across the plains, Jake would gather his family close by the fire and tell the story of how he had found their mother in a blizzard, how he had carried her to safety, how hope had come into the world on that remarkable night. The children never tired of hearing it, though as they grew older, the girls would sigh romantically while young Jake would roll his eyes, more interested in the danger and adventure than the love story at its heart. But Tabitha and Jake knew the truth of it, how the fiercest storm of their lives had brought them together, how love had grown in the shelter of that small cabin, how two lost souls had found in each other the home they had been seeking all along. And on the 10th anniversary of that fateful night, as they stood together on their porch watching a gentle snow begin to fall, Jake wrapped his arms around his wife and whispered, "Best blizzard of my life." Tabitha laughed, leaning back against his chest. "Only you would be grateful for a snowstorm that nearly killed me. Brought you to me, didn't it?" Jake countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. brought us all of this." He gestured to their home, to the land that had prospered under their care, to the window where their children could be seen playing inside. Tabitha turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, more weathered now, lined with the passing years, but still as dear to her as it had been that first night when he'd appeared like an answer to a desperate prayer. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It brought us everything." As they stood together in the falling snow, Tabitha Mason Sullivan gave thanks once more for the storm that had nearly taken her life, but had instead given her a love strong enough to weather any season, and a home built not of timber and nails but of shared dreams and abiding devotion, a shelter that would stand against whatever winds life might bring, now and for all the years to come.